Last Sam's Cage by David A. Poulsen, Chapter 20, page 216, and Epilogue, page 221. Jack Sim did go back to the zoo, just once. He and Eddie went together. It was almost 3 months to the day after the night, and the first hints of fall were in the air. They didn't go anywhere near the place where Angela had died, and they didn't pause as they passed the playground. They did stop at Last Sam's Cage, though. Neither of them spoke as they watched 3 little kids dashing in and out. One was pretending to be a lion, roaring the same way Eddie had done the first time he had gone inside. They didn't talk much during that visit to the zoo. When they got near the stream, Eddie vaulted the fence and walked to the condo. He bent down and peered inside. It looked as inviting and safe as the first time he'd slept there. Nobody had been there since he'd left. The sleeping bag was still there, and the Swiss Army knife was still stuck in the ground exactly where he'd left it. He looked around to see if he could spot the little duck that had become his friend for that time, but there were lots of brown ducks, and he couldn't be sure. He hopped the fence again, and he and Jack continued their walk. It was the first time they had seen each other since Eddie was released from the clinic, and Jack asked how he was doing. Eddie told him he was back in school and that things were going okay. Steve had not come back, and Eddie's mother told him he was in jail somewhere in BC for assaulting a guy at a party. "How's your mom?" Jack asked as they passed the conservatory. "She's fine," Eddie told him. "She doesn't go to bingo anymore, but she gets out and does other stuff." "You two, you doing all right together?" "I wouldn't say we're best friends," Eddie answered. "Maybe we won't ever be like that again, but yeah, it's okay. Who knows, maybe okay is good enough, you know? At least for now." "How about the life of crime? How's that part going?" Eddie grinned. "I figured you'd get around to that. I'm so clean I squeak. I'm boring, but clean. You reformed me." "I didn't reform you, kid." Jack looked at him. "If you're reformed, you did that yourself. All I did was find you a place to sleep at night and keep a punk from putting a knife in your guts." Eddie knew it was a lot more than that, but he also knew there was no point in arguing. "How about you? You doing okay? You miss this place?" Jack smiled. "I'm doing good. I got a different place to live. It's a basement suite not all that far from where I was. I figured I needed a change of scenery." He turned to look at Eddie. "And no, I don't miss this place. I don't miss it at all." They bought coffee and sat on a bench to drink it. "The first time you sat down beside me, I figured you must be some kind of pervert," Eddie had said between sips. Jack nodded. "There are a few weirdos out there." For some reason, they both thought this was funny, and they laughed for a long time. When they finished their coffee, they walked some more, but neither said much. It was comfortable, just walking and thinking. When they got to the swinging bridge that Jack would cross and head home, they stopped and faced one another. Eddie noticed that Jack looked older and thinner too. Jack had never had a lot of bulk to him, but now he looked even smaller. Too small. Eddie wondered if he was doing as well as he claimed. "You ever feel like coming out to our place for supper? Mom says you'd be real welcome." As he made the offer, he knew Jack would not come. "I told her about you. I mean, not everything, but she knows you're my friend." "Well," Jack held out his hand, "you've got a bus to catch, and I'm heading this way." Eddie shook Jack's hand and remembered the first time he'd done that. It was right outside Last Sam's Cage. "I don't know if I ever thanked you for all the stuff you did for me." Eddie's voice caught for a second. "No need." "There's something I have to ask you." There's something I have to ask you." Jack looked at him. "How did you know it was me who broke into... How did you know it was me who broke into your house?" Jack waited a while before answering. "Vietnam. When I was in the jungle, I figured out that if I was going to stay alive, I'd have to teach myself to notice things, everything. After a while, I got... if there was a branch bent at the wrong angle, I'd see it. If the mud was swirled where it should have been smooth, or if there was a piece of root sticking out of the ground, or in a direction it shouldn't be going, I knew. Lots of guys didn't see that stuff, and they came home in body bags. You made it a lot easier than the Viet Cong, believe me." "The banana?" Eddie looked up at Jack. Jack smiled. "That was part of it. I just bought the bananas that day, and I always buy 6 in a bunch. I figured somebody comes into my house and doesn't steal nothing but a banana, must be one hungry burglar." They both laughed. "I'll be seeing you, Eddie." It was the first time Jack had ever called Eddie by name. He smiled, then turned and walked away. It was a typical Jack Sim exit. As Eddie watched him go, he shivered. Even though the day was warm, he had a feeling that this was the last time he would see Jack Sim. He couldn't explain the feeling, it was just there. He thought about going after him, about trying to get him to come for supper today, right now, but he knew the invitation would just make Jack uncomfortable. Instead, Eddie watched Jack's slightly hunched back swaying gently in time with the movement of the bridge. Eddie thought of another long-ago conversation. He didn't know why it came back to him just now, but it was there as clear as if the words had been spoken yesterday. It was the day of his dad's funeral. Eddie had been at the park talking to Mrs. Clara Campbell. As he watched Jack disappearing in the distance, he smiled as he remembered the last thing Mrs. Clara Campbell said to him. "Have you ever had a real adventure in your whole life, Master Slater?" Eddie turned and began walking toward the bus stop. If anybody ever asked him that question again, he'd be able to say yes. He'd be able to say yes, all right. Epilogue, page 220. February 26, 10:30 p.m. I never saw Jack again. I went by his new place, but Jack was never home. I left notes the first few times, but he didn't call. It was like he wanted to put that part of his life far, far behind him. I could understand that. At least I thought I could. Only half a year after we made that last trip to the zoo together, Jack Sim died. The funeral was yesterday. I went to it as I watched the casket slowly descending to the place in the ground that would be Jack's final home. I thought a lot about the man who'd saved my life and changed it forever. I didn't cry. I didn't really feel like crying. I'd done that when I first heard that Jack had died. The cancer Jack had for the last 2 years of his life finally overtook him. That was how the man who called put it. The man said Jack had given him instructions to let me know, but no one else. 2 years. I was surprised at that. Jack had been sick for the whole summer, and he must have known, yet he never stopped doing what he'd done all those years. Every day he'd gone to the playground to look out for those kids. I'll never totally understand it. I know that. There's no way anyone can know the guilt and the pain that drove Jack Sim to lead his life the way he did. And it doesn't matter. I figure what matters is that I will remember everything that happened last summer. For a while I was afraid I might forget some of it. That time would make some of it fade, like it does to a lot of things, but now I know that won't happen. I won't forget Ratsy or Jules or Stink Pegler or Linda Chen, even though I don't want to take her out anymore. I'll always remember the gorillas and the Siberian tigers and the Przewalski horses, just like I'll remember the condo and the little brown duck and seeing my mother that night at DJ's bingo palace and how it made me feel. I'll remember all those things, and I know for certain that as long as I live, I'll remember Last Sam's cage. Even though I heard it isn't there anymore. They moved it or tore it down or something. Anyway, it's gone. Yesterday, as the casket came to a stop at the bottom of the rectangular hole, I was sure of one more thing. Surer than I've ever been of anything in my life. I'll remember Jack Sim too. Always and always. Thanks for listening.